My name's 𝗦𝗃𝗂𝗶𝘀𝗵. I work for DevOps, which is a IT consultancy. Prior to that, I worked at Barclays for 10 years, so there's a bit of a Barclays theme. Tonight, I worked very closely with Barry, so I've known Barry for a long time. And for the last 5 of those 10 years at Barclays, I was leading the DevOps transformation in the investment bank. So when you said head of DevOps, I was...
Did I get your job?
No, you didn't. I applied for your job, though, actually. Anyway, DevOps, before you joined, yes. Death of DevOps, slightly controversial. I'll put a little footnote in there as we know it. This is a bit of a mashup of several presentations. I give one on DevOps at scale, the evolution of DevOps, DevOps in the enterprise. When we talk about DevOps, DevOps in the enterprise is a whole different ballgame to DevOps at startups. And if you attend meetups a lot and listen to startups, it's very dispiriting because you're saying, oh, we're using Kubernetes, we're using AWS, we're doing all these cool things. And you think, I'm working at this big company, we're not doing any of that stuff. And you kind of think we're, at a big company, you're 10 years behind what's going on. But actually, I think the startups are probably 5 years ahead of most people. And most people are really doing DevOps in a different way, especially for a big company, than what 𝗏𝐸𝐸𝐸 might be doing. This is a model I developed at Barclays. I use it now. We use it with clients at my current company. I'm going to talk through it. I'm sure most of you are familiar with DevOps already, so I'm going to talk through it very quickly because I want to overlay on top of this model the way I see DevOps evolving and why I think the current way we're doing DevOps in big companies is really finished. So I'm just going to walk through these things quickly. We start with business requirements and tasks. So this is the agile IT part of DevOps. You put tasks on a Kanban board. Developers take those tasks, write code. They check it into a source code control system. Ideally, it's code reviewed, etc. And that code is automatically built by a build tool. It runs automated testing, and that's your CI cycle. You collect metrics out of the CI cycle. Apologies if I'm going fast, but this is not the heart of what I want to speak about. If code is built, automated, tests are all green, you've essentially got shippable code. I think that's one of the tenets of DevOps, that you're continually building code. If it's green, it's shippable. It might not be shippable into production, but it's certainly shippable into other environments. And then this is sort of the newer part of DevOps. I think the CI part of DevOps is very mature in most organizations. I think we've been doing it for probably over a decade, since before DevOps was a thing. The ops side or the CD side is much less mature. So we're writing infrastructure as code now, particularly if we're in the cloud, using things like Terraform and Ansible. We still, if you're in a large enterprise, you still have to have service management. You still have to deal with probably ServiceNow so that you cannot deploy into production without your requisite requests and changes approved. So when you've got infrastructure as code, you're building your infrastructure in an automated way, you're building your code in an automated way to produce artifacts, you're interacting ideally with a service management tool in an automated way, and you put all those things together and you've got continuous deployment. And you deploy into, it could be a cloud environment, it could be an on-prem environment, etc. Once it's in that environment, you want to be monitoring it, so we talk a lot more recently, especially about continuous observability or observability-driven design. So you're building apps that are observable. And then across the entire pipeline, you've got security concerns. You're concerned about the security within your code, within your Docker images potentially. You want to make sure people aren't bit mining in your AWS accounts, etc. And then there's also collaboration across this whole model. So chat ops, we've talked about chat ops today. So essentially, that is a DevOps model. I think it's pretty common. It's very much like the sideways figure of 8 model. Most of you have seen. Now, we take that model, and then on top of that, we put the evolution of DevOps. So DevOps, as we're talking about a lot this year, it's about 10 years old. I think 10 years ago, we started with shadow DevOps. So what does that mean? It was really a ground-up phenomenon. Developers started, there was cruise control at the very beginning. They started wanting to build their code in an automated way. We were starting to write unit tests. We wanted to have a lot more automated testing. So this came from the ground up. Developers started saying, I need a CI tool. I'm going to bring one in. I'm going to start using cruise control, for example. I need to store my artifacts somewhere, so I'm going to spin up a Nexus server. And I need to measure my code, so I'm going to spin up a SonarQube server. So all these teams from the ground up were spinning up all this infrastructure, and still at the C-suite level, no one had even heard of DevOps. No one knew what DevOps was. I think 5 years ago, when I joined the CTO team and I talked to our CTO about DevOps, he didn't know the term. He'd never heard of DevOps. So it was still 5 years ago, very new at the C-suite level, at the senior management level. No one knew what DevOps was. And I think then about 5 years ago, the enterprise woke up, and the sort of the C-suite people started to say, we need to do DevOps, we need to do Agile. And they said, oh, look, started looking around at all their development community and what they were doing, and they're going, wow, there's a lot of DevOps going on here. We need to control it. We need to centralize this stuff. We need to get central tools. We need to, we've got vendor sprawl. We've got all kinds of vendors we're dealing with. So we started getting this enterprise DevOps model. And if you look at this model, you've got Confluence, Jira. Most companies are using Confluence, Jira. You've got TeamCity, Jenkins, we saw on other slides, Bamboo. You've got Sonatype, Nexus, Artifactory as artifact management systems, all kinds of deployment, different ways of deploying your code. Might be XL Deploy, Jenkins, OpenShift, Cloudify. You've got integration with ServiceNow. You've got all kinds of deployment environments, mostly still on-prem at this time, 5 years ago. A plethora of monitoring tools, dozens of different monitoring tools. And you overlay this whole tool suite onto a DevOps model, and you've got all these issues. So you've got on-prem DevOps, on-prem infrastructure, centralized DevOps teams, poor cost transparency. So to give an example at Barclays, we knew we were using TeamCity. We knew we were a TeamCity shop. We didn't realize how many TeamCity instances we were running until we started counting them. And we found out we had 120 TeamCity instances spread out across the bank. And 120 TeamCity instances, if you think about it, if it takes 2 hours, say, to upgrade a TeamCity instance, 2 hours times 120 is 240 hours. That's six man-weeks of work every time TeamCity puts out a new instance, a new version of their software, which they were doing every 3 to 6 months. So every time they put out a new version of their software, you've got 6 man-weeks of work to keep your estate up to date. We had close to 40 artifact repositories, mostly Nexus. So that means we have 40 copies of Log4j, 40 copies of every kind of library that you can have. And most of these, in fact, all of these instances had an open door to the outside world. So there was no security scanning, no vulnerability scanning, etc. So just massive waste, because you're essentially storing a lot of these third-party artifacts 40 times, at least 40 times, and then multiple versions of those things. So multi-vendor, multi-tool, as I mentioned, the upgrades and maintenance, it was a big nightmare, really. And then I think the last point, multiple integrations. So all of these tools had to integrate with everything else. So people say Jenkins, oh yeah, we've got 100 different plugins that work with Jenkins. Well, isn't that a bit of a code smell? Or, do you really need 100 plugins for a tool? Because Jenkins is trying to integrate with everything else that's in this model. And I think when you have this, senior managers and the C-suite people are still looking at DevOps saying, I don't get it. You guys are all raving about DevOps. This looks ridiculous. This is expensive. You want me to have a central DevOps team. You're asking for 10 terabytes of storage for all your Nexus instances. And I think at this point, the benefits of DevOps were still not being realized. So I'm going to skip that. So DevOps as a service. This, for me, I'm seeing as the next evolution of DevOps. It's really cloud-based. It's moving off of prem. It's DevOps as a service. You get excellent cost transparency. Month by month, you get a bill. You know exactly how much you're paying. You get these highly integrated tool chains, no infrastructure, evergreen software. You don't have to worry about maintenance or upgrades. And everything is highly modular. So I've got GitLab I'm using as an icon there. A lot of you have probably heard the term GitOps. It was mentioned tonight. We're using GitLab with one of our clients. It's an incredible tool. It does everything. It does your code repositories. It does your building, your testing. It does your artifact storage, your deployments, and it even is trying to get into the service management space where ServiceNow is. It's trying to get into the Jira space by using its own Kanban boards, etc. So here, you just have one tool. This is the same on AWS. You've got an entire, if you're on AWS, you've got your entire your DevOps pipelines with your code commit, code build, code deploy tools, CloudFormation, etc. Azure, same thing. They've got Azure DevOps. Google Cloud has the same Google tools. So how many people here use Jenkins? Quite a few. Anyone? Yeah, no one works for 𝗬𝗏𝗶𝘀𝗶𝘀𝗲, I hope. And I've asked this question in big audiences, how many people use Jenkins? More than half the hands go up. How many people love Jenkins? Most of the hands stay up. There's no Jenkins in any of these models. There's no Jenkins in Azure or AWS or in the GitLab, in the GitOps model. I was getting emails recently from 𝗬𝗏𝗶𝘀𝗀 saying, stay tuned, next week we have an incredible announcement, and it's got a huge industry implications. You know, it turns out 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗏𝗏 is merging with Electric Cloud. You kind of go, yeah, and? You know, and it's, you know, I've mentioned already that Jenkins has 100 different plugins, but do we really want tools with 100 plugins when these tools don't have any plugins because they all just work together? So really, for me, the death of DevOps, I think, as I said earlier, it's not, you know, you look at the startups and what they're doing and you think, well, these guys are doing really cool stuff, and obviously DevOps is going to be around for a long time, but I think DevOps in the enterprise will change and will change a lot. One last slide I have. This I've kind of stolen a little bit from there's a good website if you haven't seen it, DevOps-topologies.com, and they have all these different models of how DevOps can work in a large company. I made this one up based on theirs. Again, in enterprise DevOps, if you know, we were trying to do DevOps at Barclays, and yet you can start using the tooling, you can start changing your processes, changing your culture a bit, but you still had to go to the database team when you needed to spin up a database. You still had to go to the networking team when you needed some more IP addresses or some DNS names. You still had to go to the middleware team to get new middleware queues, et cetera, et cetera. There was still a central DevOps team if you wanted a new Jira project or if you wanted a new pipeline built on a Jenkins server. So it still is a broken model from my point of view. And if you look at the DevOps as a service model, where the cloud-based model, where we look at as ops as more as an SRE, site reliability engineer, the Google model, or you can call it a DevOps engineer, you can call it a cloud engineer. These people now, the SREs or the cloud engineers, they need to know all of those things. So they need to know how to spin up databases in RDS, or they need to know how to create your own networks in Route 53, et cetera, et cetera. So another thing I talk about often in the talks is if you're in any of those smaller blue circles, really you should be looking for a new job or reskilling yourself, because the role of a DBA, the role of a network admin, again, those roles, I think in 5-10 years will be gone in the enterprise because everyone is moving to the cloud. And this role, this idea of a site reliability engineer, that's the role of the future. The people that can do all of this stuff in an automated way. You know, we talked about automation a lot tonight with Terraform, that can spin all this stuff up. That's the role that you're going to need in the future. So really, I think I probably nailed that on almost 5 minutes. 20 minutes. So that's really what I want to talk about. Really, the real change. I spent 5 years trying to get DevOps to work in a large enterprise and really struggling. And now that I'm out of that environment and working with clients that are very much cloud native, it's just a whole, the light bulb's gone off. Wow, this is really the power of DevOps. This is really what we were meant to achieve 5 years ago and really struggled to achieve. And I think that's the future. Thank you.